Hi, everybody. Welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My fabulous co-host is Laura Blackwell, who is also one of our readers tonight. So I hope that you're all healthy and safe, taking care of yourselves and each other. I started Story Hour a little over 3 years ago, which is just ridiculous, but true, during very early days of the pandemic, when I wanted to just create a space for my writer friends and I to get together and read our work to each other, just kind of build community. And it has just grown so far beyond those initial expectations. It is kind of unbelievable. So the way the Story Hour works is pretty simple. And it's a very ancient form of entertainment, which is sitting around the fire telling lies. So every week we have two authors, roughly a half an hour each, doing exactly that. Tonight, we're really happy to have, as I said, my co-host Laura Blackwell and Karlo Yeager Rodríguez. I'm also happy to announce that we have received a SIFWA Givers Grant for 2023 so that we can continue to keep the lights on, these virtual rooms open, and bring you what we believe is some of the best in spoken word speculative fiction that you can find these days. So it is our custom to ask authors to indicate a worthy cause for us to call your attention to. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a position to donate materially, that's great. If not, just be aware, spread the word. So Laura is reading tonight to fund a new location for the Red River Women's Clinic. That's a GoFundMe. That's http www.gofundme.com/f/red-river-women's-clinic-new-location. I'll be pasting that into the chat pod. I'm sure if you just Googled Red River Women's Clinic, you'd probably also pull up the GoFundMe page. So the Red River Women's Clinic of Fargo, North Dakota is ready a new location in Moorhead, Minnesota, in preparation for Dobbs v. Jackson. RRWC has served as North Dakota's only abortion clinic for over 20 years. As a state with a trigger ban in place, North Dakota would ban abortion in 30 days if Roe v. Wade is overturned. This clinic contingency plan a few miles away and across the Red River, hence the name, is the best option to ensure care is not interrupted for people seeking abortions in this region. As an independent provider, they don't have the name or the notoriety to fall back on funding or like the way that national organizations are able to do. But it's an indie clinic. They can also meet the very unique needs of this local region with tailored, compassionate care. Karlo is reading tonight for the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, the Center for Investigative Journalism. CPI recognizes that the fundamental requirement for a true democracy is that citizens are well informed and that there are independent entities with the capacity to oversee the powers that operate in society, whether public or private. So donations received by the center are tax exempt in Puerto Rico and the United States. The organization receives donations and support from foundations, institutions, and individuals who share their vision of civic empowerment and value the verticality and quality of the journalistic exercise. So the Center for Investigative Journalism, the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo. And the URL for that is the Spanish name. I have it here somewhere. I will paste it into the chat pod. So we're going to start the program tonight with Karlo. Karlo Yeager Rodríguez is originally from the enchanting island of Puerto Rico, but moved to the Baltimore area some years ago, where he now lives with his wife and one odd dog. His fiction has appeared in Uncanny, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Correo magazine. He is also the host of Podside Picnic, where he and his co-hosts discuss the literature of the fantastic. And he is also the nonfiction editor for Seize the Press magazine. Karlo, welcome.
Thanks for having me. All right. So I'm going to be reading from my most recent story, which appeared in Correo magazine, issue 2.3. And that would be, basically CorreoMag.com online. Also, I'll just get right into it. I'm sorry. So this is called All Good Children Come Out to Play. For longer than I could remember, we had been Lazaro and Marta. We should have been celebrating our 9th birthday together. Instead, my twin brother was laid out on our table. He looked so small and still and pale, the silent point around which our family and neighbors swirled, dancing and singing and laughing. Abuela Trini held me in her lap and cradled my head in the crook of her arm. Her reedy hum meandered through the cuatro music until my tears dried and my sobs shrank to hiccups. I had never meant for any of this to happen when I slipped away to bathe in our secret pool the day before, the one only Lazaro and I knew about, the one nestled in a clearing up in the mountain and surrounded by yakurumo trees, the one we had splashed around in, the one with the chilly spring-fed waters, the one where the freshwater shrimp tickled our legs and nipped at our feet. All I had wanted was to be alone. It was important to welcome a new year of life by washing away all traces of the old, but my insistence on doing this by myself had wounded Lazaro. It's my birthday too, he'd said after I made him promise not to follow. I left him sulking where the footpath began its ascent. I hung my clothes on a branch to keep them clean. My dress and my underclothes floated, pale as ghosts, against the greenery. I sighed my way into the chill of the water and let the imperfect quiet of green and living things flow over me. At least until Lazaro showed up. At first, I pleaded with him to go back, to leave me be. But this only made him laugh at me, and from the water's edge, he snatched my dress off the branch, holding it up against his body, taunting me by repeating everything I said in falsetto. I stormed out of the water, dripping, too furious to bother covering up my nakedness anymore, and shoved him. The moment stretched. A breeze whispered through the trees, and the yagarumos flashed the silvery undersides of their leaves as my brother slipped on one of the boulders. The wet crack his head made when it bounced off another rock sounded so far away. I have no memory of how I got back home, wide-eyed but unable to cry or to even speak, to confess what I had done. Now I was alone. Now, because of me, the day we should have celebrated our entry into the world would instead be marked by one of us departing it. One day for the search party to pull Lazaro out and bring him back, another to watch over him and pay our respects, and a third to surrender him to the town priest for burial. Along the frayed edges of where Lazaro had fit into me was an ache, a dull pain where he'd once been. Who would I become once that wound healed? How does anyone learn to live without half their soul? Why am I the only one crying that he's gone? I asked. Dry your tears, Martita. Abuela Trini stroked my hair. We may offer up the tearful faces Padre Eusebio expects at his service, but today we are also glad your brother has escaped all the pain and heartbreak of this world. Families from the neighboring hills came straight from the cane fields, company white smudged green from the day's work. They bowed their heads over their palm frond hats as they shuffled past my brother. A cluster brought their drums, while other workers left their machetes leaning against the door jamb to join in the dancing. Come, no more tears, Abuela said when I gave a long, shuddering sigh. She smoothed hair from my brow, her hand dry and leathery from back when rolling tobacco made good money, before sugar became king. Trying to obey her wishes, I thought about when Lazaro and I had been younger, and each pretended to be the other to see if anyone noticed. When I remembered that no one had ever caught us, not even Abuela Trini, a shaky smile emerged. That's it. Rejoice that tonight Lazaro flies through the door of the moon and to the other side of the sky. Mommy let the drums pull her away from the town priest and swirled her skirts as she danced. Papi was working his shift, hacking sugarcane because the mayordomo hadn't let him leave for Lazaro's wake, much less his funeral. When the priest cast his gaze about, Abuela Trini slid me off her lap. Someone needed to arrange for my brother's transport and burial in the town graveyard. When Lazaro had been gone almost 4 months, and with Mommy's pregnancy showing too much for her to continue working, Papi alone couldn't earn enough to keep us all fed. I took my brother's place working the fields. I'd helped load the carts at first, but with the Safra falling behind schedule and threatening to spoil, they needed every hand available for cutting. Hours swinging a machete under a merciless sun. It was what I deserved, and after the first few weeks, my blisters had toughened into calluses. Pain smoldered deep in my muscles and bones, flaring up and making my hands tremble whenever I needed to do anything more delicate than hacking. Like attempting to sneak an offering of tobacco leaves onto the shrine I'd built with Abuela Trini for Lazaro. My hand spasmed, scattering the sheaf all over the dulce de coco Abuela Trini had made. She turned and shot me a look before she gathered the dried leaves with a few deft movements. She tucked them back into a bundle and tied them together again. Here, Abuela Trini said, handing it back to me. When I didn't move to take it, she glanced at my hands. I clasped one hand within the other to lessen the throbbing pain. After we're finished here, let me teach you how to hold your machete the right way to cut cane. She placed a wreath of blood-red hibiscus flowers around Lazaro's cedula papers, his mark scrawled at the bottom of the parchment. Abuela Trini had tried so hard to teach him his letters so he could at least write his name, but it never took. She fussed over the sheaf, fanning it out before she caught me looking.
We just lost the audio, Karlo.
Oh, my mistake.
Oh,
You think I didn't know? She quirked her lips. The moon was a phantom crescent framed in our doorway. If Lazaro was watching me, peeking around the edge of the moon, I didn't want to speak for him when he no longer could. When he was alive, I could always count on him to keep my secrets. I thought it only fair that I kept his in turn. We had stolen Abuela Trini's tobacco, but when the time came, Lazaro teased me because I didn't dare try it. Ignoring my warnings, he stuffed the whole wad into his cheek like he'd seen our grandmother do and chewed on it until he dry heaved. Even now, my gorge rose as I recalled the smell of bile emerging from his open mouth in a thin rope to mix with the dust of the chicken yard. When Abuela Trini had called for Lazaro to help her, he wiped at the sick on his chin and did as he was told. She asked why he looked so pale, but Lazaro insisted he felt fine. So for the rest of the day, she acted like she didn't notice how sallow his skin looked and kept giving him chores. He drew water from the well and carried it to her, cleaned the chicken coop, and oh, hadn't he gathered enough eggs to trade with the Sanchez family over on the next hill in exchange for some salt cod? Defiant to the end, he hadn't complained once. He never let her know he was sick until I pleaded with Abuela Trini to stop. Dios mío, stop. Well, do you? Abuela Trini's question made me flush. Rather than meet her gaze, I looked at the shrine we'd built for Lazaro. It didn't seem enough. Just a small table with the only photograph we had of him flanked by 2 candles and surrounded by a wreath of hibiscus. Within the circle was a glass of water and a plate holding the tobacco and dulce de coco, the only 2 things we knew he'd liked in life. He said you gave it to him. My cheeks blazed at the lie. Abuela Trini scoffed. And you believed him? After all the times he tricked you? It was just how he was. Abuela glanced at me, smiling. He was something, she said. Wasn't he? I ran a finger around the edges of the ofrenda instead of meeting her eyes. Would any of this help see Lázaro again? As if in answer, Abuela handed me a bucket and nudged me toward the chicken coop. Pushing my hands under the clucking hens to take their still warm eggs, I was reminded of our favorite game, trading places, dressing in each other's clothes, and how we had fooled everyone. I realized with a pang that we wouldn't have been able to play that game for much longer with the way our bodies had started to change. Another ragged hole where something used to be. I kicked up clouds crossing the chicken yard on my way back to the house, dusting the eggs in my basket. Abuela was outside talking with the priest from town. When he mentioned holding a memorial mass for Lázaro on the Feast of Holy Innocents, the mere reminder that it would mark the anniversary of his death reopened that hurt all over again. It used to be an important day for the both of us. Our birthday. We were tucked away in an overgrown corner of the cemetery for the graveside service, tall weeds poking up between the headstones. Sweat trickling in the blaze of late afternoon, I struggled not to fidget. I'd already endured Mommy snapping at me when I chafed at wearing my best dress during our 2-day ox cart ride into town. Behind us, the men chosen to carry our patron saint in the festival procession stood in solemn silence. Santa Juana's statue peeked over their shoulders, her Taino features severe as she sheltered children huddled under her embrace. When the ceremony was done, Papi joined the men in putting their backs into pushing Santa Juana's bier. With the priest in the lead and the bier rolling behind him, our procession wended its way from Lázaro's graveside through the overgrown parts of the cemetery until we passed the shining marble crypts of the moneyed families. We walked through the tunnel connecting the graveyard to the cobbled streets of town, gathering festival goers and worshippers carrying baskets with dolls in them. A handful of people in painted coconut masks fell in with us, stalking around the edges of the crowd. The person who wore the crowned and bearded king mask capered and pantomimed, sending his guards among the others. They searched among the baskets carried by many, tasked with finding the hidden baby Jesus doll before the procession reached the cathedral steps. Abuela Trini had once told me that the festival celebrated on Lázaro's and my birthday was to honor the children slaughtered by wicked King Herod. Up here in the hills, though, people believed something different. Niñito Jesus had interceded when he found out, and out of remorse, he made a special place for the souls of the innocents who had died in his stead that day. Abuela Trini's hand in mine, I noticed other children nearby trying to look dignified, but managing only boredom. We traded looks, and in that wordless way children share, agreed we were all friends, at least for long enough to slip away and find somewhere to play together. I squeezed Abuela's hand and she nodded her permission. I led my new friends back to the quiet and overgrown part of the graveyard to make sure Lázaro didn't feel left out. We ran through the tall grass, weaving between the gravestones and the lengthening shadows. Our whoops and peals of laughter died against the stones of the town's high wall, and the air of the graveyard, now still and cool as the surface of a hidden forest pool, swallowed up our cries. Music from the festival flowed over the wall to us, as faint as if played from the next world. We played among the headstones, stopping to call the names carved into them to join in our games. After circling them once, twice, 3 times, we chose whom amongst us would be it in sing-song. Tin marín de dos pingües, cucaramácara, títere fue. ¿Cuántas patas tiene el gato? 1, 2, 3 y 4. I circled behind the girl who was it and hid behind a headstone so old its name had been worn away. She counted aloud, her eyes scrunched closed. By the time she reached 10, the last sliver of the sun had slipped beyond the edge of the world. Night fell, the sky dark and moonless. Where the moon should have been, a deeper darkness gaped in the night sky. The pale stone of the moon rolled aside. The door to the other side of the sky lay open. The girl gave up trying to find us and called for us to reveal ourselves. I stood and stepped out to see new children, pale as moonlight, appear in the long grass. There were many more than had started the game. Motionless, we living children looked from one to the other, trying to take their measure. It was one thing to call them in play, quite another when they appeared. We tensed, uncertain. The ghost children's wan, bloodless laughter broke the spell, and without anyone speaking a word, I knew the game had shifted. Instead of hide and seek, we were now playing tag. I turned, ready to run. A pale, cold hand closed around my wrist. Lazaros. His fingers shone against my brown skin. I ached to turn toward him, a joyful welcome on my lips. Don't, Lazaros said. And it was his voice. Cierra los ojos. I squeezed my eyes shut, even when I could hear the trickle of stale water, smell its rot. Ready? I nodded, bracing myself, but still gasped as my twin brother poured into me, a chill soaking my flesh, seeping into my bones. He clambered into my skin, curled and entangled with me. Lazaro? I blinked. The other children who had also been caught by their silent playmates rubbed their eyes as if waking from disheveled dreams. They turned towards us as one, eyes gleaming with a cold light. Go! Lazaro's words hissed out of my mouth. Back the way you came. If they catch me, they'll send me back. Now! The other children converged, almost surrounding me. With them in pursuit, I sprinted through the cemetery and up through the narrow tunnel. When I came out onto the small plaza on the other side, I slipped on some crushed palm leaves and carnations the procession had left in its wake. The plaza and the street were almost empty, with only a few stragglers here and there. Ahead, the tail of the procession was turning a corner, still making its way uphill to the cathedral. Let's catch up with them, Lazaro said, and with my own voice. We can blend in with the crowd, use our stronger connection to wait them out. I ignored the people nearby who thought I was talking to them, leaving them with the words still in their mouths. Behind me, the other children burst out of the tunnel, paused long enough to see me, and as one, kept up the chase. Panting, I turned a corner, almost at the tail of the procession. The masked figures lurked around the edges of the crowd, the king commanding his guards with a gesture. To avoid having their dolls snatched away, the men and women held their Moses baskets aloft and out of the guards' reach. Ahead, the church bell rang and rang and rang, calling the town to mass and the procession to its destination. Watch out. I flinched at Lazaro's warning just as one of the girls from the cemetery shrieked past, slipped and tumbled to the cobbles. She picked herself up again, swaying a bit as she stood. The pale light flashed behind her eyes and was gone, leaving her to blink at me in confusion. My breath sawing in and out of me, I turned to squirm my way through the crowd. I ignored protests from people I pushed aside, sparing panicked glances at the ground to avoid falling. Ahead, Santa Juana towered over the procession, close enough that I could see the thin gold wire of her halo gleaming in the lamplight. The cathedral loomed, its open doors within sight. We were close, so close. Laughter I wasn't sure was fully my brother's bubbled out of me. Vamos, Lazaro said. This will be easier than stealing Abuelo's tobacco, remember? The masked King Herod figure burst into our midst, people backing away from him with cries of surprise. Unable to keep pace, I was left stranded with him looming over me, hunched, his crowned mask turned this way and that, peering at everyone's faces before finding mine. He bent closer to look into my eyes before he capered, pointing at me with one hand, gesturing for his guards to capture me with his other. I froze, stomach clenching. Even Lazaro, so quick with his words, fell into dismayed silence as the tall figures drew closer, arms extended to snatch us away. A flash of movement broke the spell, and another of the dead-eyed children lunged at me. I spun away, crowing as his fingertips grazed the swirl of my skirts and closed on empty air. I spun too close to the king, who still stepped away too fast and, windmilling his arms, crashed into his guards. They collapsed, the dead-eyed child squirming to get out from under a heap of limbs. At last, we came alongside the bier, rumbling along. Papi was at the head, pulling while the men farther back helped steer. Santa Juana's fierce gaze was fixed on some unseen danger ahead, ready to protect the children huddled against her. I pulled aside the heavy velvet draped over the sides to crawl into the dark, narrow space. The bier swayed as Papi and the other bearers pushed it. Great spot. Lázaro filled my nose with the smell of water flowing over stone. They won't see us until it's too late. The bearers' footfalls and grunts of effort echoed around us. Could they hear us? I've missed you, I whispered just in case. You want me to stay? How else can I ever make it up to you? For I tried to confess at last, to take the first tottering steps towards forgiveness, but the remaining words were like stones piled on my tongue. Sharing the same space, did he already know what I wanted, what I needed from him? The bier slowed, rumbled to a stop. We were once one, I said, reaching for the next words. Made two, right? Lázaro made a small noise in the dark before speaking. Both of us in the same body at the same time? Already I was cramped in my own skin, shoved aside in the little time he'd been back. I couldn't say why I had been surprised with the way he always hogged our hammock. Remember our game, I asked? Wouldn't it be fun to fool them again? The thunk of the brake levers locking made me jump. I pulled aside the fabric to peek outside. Part of the cathedral was visible through the crowd, and I realized Mommy must be waiting for me at the top of the steps, sharpening her words for whenever I showed up again. I'll get more time with Mommy and Papi? Lázaro asked. I nodded, thinking of Mommy, and realizing he couldn't know, said, yes, and your baby brother. Brother? Could be a sister, but Mommy's sure it's a boy. Marta, Lázaro said in a small voice, why are you doing this, being so good to me? I already told you. I miss you. I rubbed at my eyes with the heels of my hands. I wish I could take it back, what happened. I wish you'd had more time with us, with me. Lázaro's chill receded for a moment. What do you say? My chest ached, waiting for his answer. You know, you'll get to find out what's on the other side, don't you? I guess, I said. Thought about saying more, but didn't know how to begin. Help Abuela Trini keep the shrine, and come look for me among the gravestones next year. You ready, hermanita? Little sister, I made a rude noise. I was born first. Before I could think about what I was doing anymore, I jerked aside the cloth and stepped out into the impossible brightness of a midday that was not, transported from the nighttime festival to the shore of our shared place, the secret pool of our memories, the breeze setting the jaguarumo trees to whisper among themselves even now. Far-off birds called to each other, and the quiet rill of water flowing over immense rounded stones made them glisten. Lázaro rose from the pool, water streaming off of him. Mud was smeared on his teeth, and freshwater shrimp squirmed in his hair as he waded out. I moved toward the water's edge, towards his haunt. I stammered, looking at my hands rather than at the ragged edges of where his eyes had been. He took my hands and guided me into the water, shushing me. Underwater, the shrimp nipped at my toes. Can you forgive me? Hermanita, Lázaro pressed a finger to his mouth. Don't spoil the fun. Please, I wanted to ask, but waded past him, first to my waist, then flinching to my chest, the cold stealing my breath away. Submerging, I felt the tug of our mingled souls pulled north and south, drifting apart. Lazaro would stream into my body and wake, blinking on the church steps while I kicked through the deeper water, 1,000 feather-light caresses trailing across my skin. Shrimp peeked out from rocks, feelers like fingers tickling me as I kicked into the dark. Lungs burning, I wanted to glance back, wanted to wish my brother luck. But ahead, light slanted through the water, and I kicked and kept kicking against the cold dark until I could splash out into the glory of light and air once more. All right.
Thank you, Karlo. That was lovely. Man. It's our custom here at Story Hour to just pause for a moment between readers. Just let the story resonate and ring. And so we're going to do that. Karlo Yeager Rodríguez, everybody. Thank you so much, Karlo.
Thank you.
I'm really delighted to introduce our next reader, Laura Blackwell, in part because she's my co-host here at Story Hour. Laura is a Pushcart-nominated writer of speculative fiction. Her stories have appeared in magazines and anthologies, including Nightmare, Cat's Cast, Chiral Mad 5, and Weird Book. Her next story will appear in Aseptic and Faintly Sadistic, an anthology of hysteria fiction, and I cannot wait for that to come out just based on the title alone. She co-hosts the online reading series Story Hour. That's us. You can find Laura online at pronouncedlaura, LAHRA.com, and on Twitter and Mastodon's Wandering Shop at pronounced Laura. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. I hope my voice isn't too after listening to Karlo's story, because wow. So this story first appeared in Nightmare in July 2022. It is a Bluebeard retelling, so it does include gore, murder, violence against women. It also does have animal death. So those are the cautions for it. This is what the dead birds taught me. The first time I saw him, I was crouched in a ditch by the highway, lancet poised, holding a crumbly paged book open to the words to reanimate a dead owl. Anne leaned against our dad's old car on the shoulder, just a few feet past the impromptu memorial some of Mom and Dad's students had put up. The flowers were wilting and the photos were fading, just like our parents' ghosts in the ditch where they'd died. I walked all up and down it, grasses itching at my legs despite my jeans, but there was no spark of Mom or Dad, just like there'd been none of the closed caskets. They'd moved on easily, or maybe just been gone too long. It had been over a month. I had just found the owl crawling with ants, but its eyes barely milky. Anne examined the poor thing and said it had probably died from eating poisoned rats. I was getting ready to lance some blood from my finger when the man pulled his shiny black car over, trapping our car between his and the memorial. Not on purpose, I thought at the time. He was fair-skinned, with neatly trimmed hair and a nice button-down. His leather-soled dress shoes crunched the gravel on the shoulder until he was close enough to ask Anne in a pleasant, regular voice, not a shout, "Do you need help, miss?" "No, thanks," said Anne curtly. "We're just here for a project." She nodded in my direction, and he turned in to take in the sight of me, 17 and looking younger, face round as a child and chest flat as a boy's. Anne's 8 years older than me, and she looks young too, short and freckled. But even then, she had soft curves and sad eyes. "Hello," he said to me, friendly and helpful. "So you girls are all right then?" I appreciated the manners, but I was old enough to know that look a boy gives you when he realizes he's not going to get anywhere with your prettier friend unless he's nice to you too. I just hadn't seen it from someone his age before. He looked older than Anne, but not nearly as old as our parents had been. 30s maybe. We're almost done, I assured him, and thanked him and told him to drive safe. A neat dismissal, polite in words and rude in tone. My cheeks heated with embarrassment, and I went back to the owl. I didn't want anything from it, and I wasn't sure I could do whatever it asked. I told a dead squirrel I'd look after its babies once, and I had no idea where to find them. But it was good practice for bigger reanimations. With the dim spark inside it, the owl asked to get out of the hot sun. I drew the patterns in my blood on the back of my hand, whispered an incantation from the book. It's amazing what you can find used in a university town. And told the owl to fly away and finish decaying on the welcome mat of the only house in sight. It was spiteful of me, but I couldn't think of anything else to ask, and it has to be a favor for a favor. Mary, you got to stay away from men like that, Anne told me when I got back into the car. She was a stricter parent than our parents had been. He has death on his hands. Anne had no interest in necromancy, but she had the knack all the same. He could be a veteran, I said, trying to be charitable, or maybe just show Anne she didn't know everything. Or he might work in a slaughterhouse. Anne pressed her lips together. I don't think so. The next time I saw him was 4 years later. Lots of people invited Anne and me to their various churches after our parents died, and once they stopped asking, I started going. It seemed a likely place to meet people interested in life after death. I met him officially at one of those churches, the one that had a stained glass window of a dove pieced out in white against blue. Although I'd filled out and looked a lot like Anne had the first time we'd met, he didn't seem to recognize me, and I didn't remind him. I saw the deaths on his hands, and were there more than before, or had I remembered wrong? But he was always well-dressed and polite, good manners, always with a smile that didn't so much play on his face as sit there, a fixture, like the carefully knotted necktie below it. Sometimes he ushered, showing grateful old ladies to their seats. They beamed up at him, eyes lit from within by his attention, invited him to meet their daughters or nieces or granddaughters. Anne didn't come to church with me, so she didn't have anything new to say. I learned his name, but I dislike saying it now. Anne had control of the family trust, and she knew the smart thing to do was sell the house we grew up in and buy a small condo to share. The two of us were right on top of each other, driving each other nuts. When Anne and I did talk, we argued more and more. The trust paid for my college and her grad school, and it would pay for my grad school if I went. My senior year of college, she nagged me constantly. She wanted me to spend more time building my portfolio and applying to MFA programs, less time reanimating dead animals. Anne didn't understand. She was a biologist, like Mom and Dad, who specialized in birds, not like Mom and Dad. So she was both more practical and more head in the clouds than me. Neither Anne nor I could help being haunted, but we handled it differently. The sadness in her eyes had distilled into a brisk determination. How can anyone take you seriously as an artist if you don't get an MFA? She asked me one day, her mouth firm and sure. Anne didn't really ask questions. It will open doors for you. What if I don't even know what doors I want open? I asked. A real question. I loved art, woodcuts especially, but nothing made me feel whole the way necromancy did, and there's no degree program for that. You know, the trust says I can take money out to start a business. I could set myself up as a psychic or a pet finder or something. Anne gave me a withering look. I don't think Mom and Dad would approve. That was low. I stomped out of the house without my phone or wallet and set off on foot. It was late autumn, colder and darker than it had felt inside the stifling condo. I walked further out than usual into a neighborhood of littered sidewalks and cracked storefront windows. When the sun got low, I sidled into a bus shelter and tried not to be too obvious checking out the map and schedule for this line I'd never taken before. Did I have enough change in my pocket for the fare? The heat from anger and exercise was fading, and my fingers stiffened as I tried to count the coins in my pocket by feel. I steeled myself to ignore the freshly washed car that stopped next to me, especially when I heard the window roll down. But then he said my name. Mary? The face peering out was familiar and currently lined with concern. Do you need a ride? I recognized him from church, where I'd seen him every Sunday for a year. Anne had told me to stay away from him. She was right about one thing. He did have death on his hands. Not the many small deaths of a rodent exterminator, but several from something bigger. Anne's judgment wasn't looking great to me right now, though, and he was offering me a way out of a rundown neighborhood with more liquor stores and pawn shops than I'd ever seen, so close together. I'd gotten used to his face over a year's worth of Sundays. The men eyeing me from doorways were strangers with shifty smiles. I answered, I do, thanks. And there I was in his car, the smell of leather soothing my cold, runny nose, not sure where I wanted to get dropped off. I didn't want to go back to the condo where Anne would be waiting with the same lectures and condescending advice. I didn't want to go to the campus print studio where I was liable to ruin half a dozen woodblocks, gouging them too hard. So he said he'd drive me until I felt like going home. The leather-scented air was warm and the ride was smooth, and I found myself talking about fighting with Anne and not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. He was a good listener, interested in my senior project of making woodcuts of fairy tales. Printmaking was my favorite process, xylography in particular. It was satisfying to gouge strips of wood out of a blank block, to ink it and make art that was its own reverse. It also gave me plausible deniability for the light scarring on my hands, as long as nobody else could read necromantic symbols. So far, so good. I especially liked this project because fairy tales have so many ways of saying the same things, or of making one tweak and changing everything. Also, lots of fairy tale characters are orphans, like Anne and me, and I've always been aware of how lucky I was that she was old enough to become my guardian. Both aware and resentful, because who wants their sister looking after them, even if she's 8 years older? I didn't tell him all that, of course. The past 5 years had brought more pity than I'd ever wanted, and it was a force-fed dish that tasted like ashes. Instead, I told him how I was making triptychs of the same scenes from variants: Perrault, Grimm, Jacobs, how I carved the likeness of the bleeding key, the woman dripping honey and feathers, the diamond ring on the severed hand. I complained about Anne's insistence that an MFA program was the right path for me. Just because she went for graduate degrees didn't mean I had to. What does your man say? He asked. When I told college guys about my senior project, they made jokes about Disney princesses. They had no idea how bloody and violent fairy tales were, nor how closely they mirrored my ever-grieving heart. Don't have one. Girlfriend? He asked, watching me out of the corner of his eye. After I shook my head, he shook his too and sighed. A pretty girl should have someone for a fairy tale ending. I'd talked quite a while, and the car was purring through the outskirts of town. The hills and the trees cast long shadows across the road. I shivered despite the car's enveloping warmth. You don't mind, we're near my house and I need to get something. He wasn't really asking. He didn't say anything before turning up a long and twisting driveway, tall pines looming on both sides. He didn't explain before pulling the car to a stop, opening my door, holding out a hand to help me out with a smile. My anger at Anne settled in my stomach, making me feel the uneasiness there. When I touched his hand, I felt death. Several deaths from strong sparks, extinctions that left nothingness in their wakes. Maybe it was like I'd told Anne all that time ago, that he was a veteran or worked in the slaughterhouse. Maybe he just brought me to the slaughterhouse. I'll wait here. My voice sounded brittle and fake to my own ears, but he pulled me out of my seat and walked me toward the door, his hand flat between my shoulder blades as if guiding a child who might slip and fall. There are bears in the woods, he said, And although I didn't believe him, the determination in his voice scared me. I didn't have my phone, didn't dare try to run. He was bigger than me, most people are, and he knew his own land. A line from a fairy tale ran through my head. Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood run cold. The house was like some fancy cabin that rich people keep as a second home. It looked kind of 1970s with a high ceiling and one wall that was nothing but a giant window overlooking a stone patio, the wooded hillside, and the other hills beyond. No neighbors close by. Playing along and waiting for an opening looked like my best bet. He offered me a drink and chuckled when I declined. I wouldn't want you to break the law. I was on my second month of being 21, but he didn't need to know that. He looked pleased that I was obeying the law, that I was behaving nicely. I wondered if he'd have been just as pleased if I'd let him get me drunk. He didn't even take off his coat. You'll feel better with some food in you, and then you can make up with your sister. Nobody delivers here, but there's a good Italian place not too far. You like pasta? They make their own. Lasagna's my favorite, thank you. It's the most time-consuming pasta dish on any menu. They make a great lasagna. You'll love. A thump at the wall-sized window cut him off. A bird had crashed into the window. It fell to the flagstones below, just outside the sliding glass door. He laughed at my startled jump. It happens all the time. You can use masking tape on the window to keep them from doing that. Not even a suggestion, not just a fact, not too bold. I'll be back soon. Make yourself at home. There's only one room unfit for company and it's locked. He'd come back for something. He didn't pick it up before he left. Once the door closed behind him, I searched for a landline phone. Unless there was one behind the locked door under the stairs, there wasn't one on the first floor. The second floor was nothing but a bedroom and a bathroom, both phoneless. Although the bathroom had 2 sinks, it had just the hygiene basics, nothing to suggest anything but a man living alone, maybe not even full time. No tampons in the cabinet. I opened the patio door and picked up the bird, a jay with brilliant blue feathers and a broken neck. Its spark just starting to fade. When I asked it what it wanted, it said, to be warm. So I tore the staple from a receipt from my pocket and scratched a necromantic symbol over my sternum. Then I tucked the bird's cooling corpse inside my shirt and held it. While I spoke the incantations, I brought pictures to my mind of Anne, our condo, and our street. Then I said, I know jays are clever birds, and I've warmed you up. Please help me. I let it go. Its spark dim but steady, and watched it fly away. I'd asked a big favor, but if the jay could tell Anne, she would come. In the meantime, I needed to arm myself. I searched the house again, this time for a big knife in the kitchen or a gun in the sock drawer, but no. He didn't seem to cook, and his razor was electric. Even the fireplace didn't have the usual tools. I'd looked everywhere but the locked room, and there was a key hanging from a hook beside it. It was an old-fashioned one with a round handle, polished to a shine and honed to a sharp point. I doubted it would make a good weapon. The grip was awkward, and the point wasn't long enough to make more than a scratch. But it was all I had. Nothing happened when I took the key from the hook, nor when I unlocked the door. But when I pushed cautiously inward, a flash of red lit my hand in the key, blood red. A silent alarm, and I was pretty sure it didn't alert the police. When the door swung open, I was completely sure. Cold air rushed out, shiver-inducing, scented with lilies and chlorine bleach. Cool fluorescent light gleamed on white tiled walls. The floor was lightly mottled concrete, a large drain set in the center. A meat hook hung from the ceiling above it. 6 stand-up freezers with clear doors, the kind Anne and I used to linger in front of, arguing fudge pops versus ice cream sandwiches, dotted the walls at even intervals. It was hard to look at the women inside. Each freezer held a corpse in a lacy white dress and a frilly veil. Despite their varying states of mummification and decay, There was something to distinguish each of them. White teeth set in a narrow jaw, a braid of night black hair, tiny, delicate feet. Stands held them upright, and someone had wired bouquets of withering lilies into their hands, like dolls, like Snow White, like no human being should ever be. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work using the key to slice the most powerful symbols I knew into my arms. I pressed too hard and brought out too much blood. I used the excess to finger paint the floor, muttering every incantation that had a chance of working. Over the years, I'd memorized a lot. But I had never raised a human. I hadn't been able to raise my parents, even though we were close. I'd been to dozens of wakes since then, carved up hands and bloody gloves, and I'd never so much as made an eyelid twitch. When the scent of bleach and lilies waned beneath the iron of my blood, the girls and women stirred. Fingers flexed against petals, scrabbled to unwind wire. Looking into their glass eyes, voice shaking, I begged each one for help. I need to escape. I need to live. Their chins jerked up and down. They had felt the same. Honest with the dead for the first time, I told them, I don't know what I can promise in return, but I'll try. Their longings tumbled over one another, practiced and eager. Their desiccating minds sent images of their friends, their families, the people they'd never gotten as close to as they'd hoped. Their art, their work, their gardens. They'd been waiting for someone to ask what they wanted so they could say, tell my parents I love them. Tell everyone it wasn't my fault. And hurt him. Make him pay. My mouth filled with acid, fear and rancor made physical. I rolled up my jeans and cut symbols into my calves, and soon I ran out of floor to paint with blood. Head spinning, I painted curses on the walls with stinging fingers. My heartbeats kept the only time that mattered, and still I lost count. The front door opened and fast, heavy steps brought him to the bloodied room. I asked just one thing, he said in an aggrieved tone. All I asked of you was to stay out of that room. I had to buy every second I could, and that meant keeping him talking, but I was done playing nice. You really think you can kidnap somebody to your remote house that doesn't have a phone and not have her look for any way out she can find? I was going to take you back to your sister. I'm a gentleman. His disappointment weighed heavily in the air, smothering me as silently and surely as carbon monoxide. All you had to do was be good. And these women here? Actually, I think some of them may be minors, girls. I was so cold with rage that my fingers trembled under their coat of blood. His victims were still, but I could feel their sparks, faint and furious. What did they do wrong? Oh, Mary. He sighed like he really believed he'd been hard done by. I had such a good feeling about you, about our connection. I thought you were different. We're all different, but none of us deserve this. When I gestured to the freezer cases, he lunged. He was bigger than me, and his hands were strong. When they closed around my throat, I felt 6 deaths all at once. The women and girls let out a rattling howl. They hammered against their glass coffins, leaned against the doors until they lurched out. Maybe their gowns rustled, maybe their white satin slippers made no sound on the bloody floor. I wish I had witnessed what they did in those terrifying moments, but I was aware of nothing but my own desperation to survive. I clawed at his hands, but he didn't let go. I couldn't breathe. Bright spots bloomed in my vision, my own spark going supernova. Get away from my sister, said Anne from the door. I think he was going to laugh until a pair of purple-streaked hands reached up to cover his eyes from behind, blackened and broken fingernails scrabbling around the sockets. Guess who? A voice crooned in my mind, and in his, I hope. Another withered figure, her hair oiled and combed to a coppering shine, caressed the blue-black stubble shading his jaw before poking bony fingers at his voice box like Eve plucking at Adam's apple. Others grabbed at his ankles, his hands, his belt. While the 6 dead women and girls tore at him, I wrenched free and ran past to get to Anne. Their rasps and rustles softened the edges of his frantic yells. Get off me, get off! Fading into inarticulate fear and fury. Together, Anne and I ran to her car. She drove me straight to the hospital. On the way, she told me about the jays that had pecked at her bedroom window, extremely uncharacteristic behavior, even if they'd all been alive, and how she followed that uncharacteristic flock to me. When the police got to his house, the man had gone hoarse and hollow-eyed. Shallow bleeding grooves in his flesh matched the blood and skin under the fingernails of the dead. The corpses were inanimate, but their presence was enough to launch 6 murder investigations. Related charges followed. The first victim was his wife, and her family filed a wrongful death suit that's still pending. Anne and I both testified at the murder trial, leaving out all mention of necromancy without quite committing perjury. I think Mom and Dad would have been proud of us. I said that I cut myself to make him want to leave me alone. The prosecution painted me as a naive, sensitive orphan, taken in by a show of seeming fatherliness. The defense did something similar, but leaned hard into the idea that I must be damaged and crazy. Sometimes it seemed like it was the dead women and girls on me on trial, instead of the man who murdered them. I hope he gets killed in prison. Anne says that would be bad. The sooner he dies, the sooner there will be a movie about him. I know she's right, but he doesn't have enough time to pay off 6 life sentences anyway. I just want him off the planet as soon as possible. Perhaps my heart's blood has always run cold. My senior art show was the best attended in the history of the department. I've made some woodcuts for concert posters and book illustrations, and I'm building my portfolio. No more fairy tales, just birds and doors and whatever truths I can share, with an eye toward applying to MFA programs out of state. Anne and I could use a new start. Despite her attention to bird behavior, testifying in a murder trial has not been great for her academic career. The podcasts and even some of the news outlets called me Lucky Number 7 and Final Girl. Always girl, although I voted in every election and bought my own liquor. America loves a girl, guiltless and guileless, and loves her best with the body of a woman and the eyes of a child. Some women call themselves girls, and it's not hard to see why, although I don't see what good it does them. Society would rather have a dead girl than a living woman. But all I want is to live, and I want that for all of us. I want girls to live to be adults. I want women to live as who we are, full-grown humans with as much to offer and as much to demand as anyone else. I talk to the dead, hear their regrets and dissatisfactions. I no longer make them promises I'm not sure I can keep. Whether animal or human, no being is practice for another. It's better to be alive, our sparks bright with all our passions, beating our wings, fighting into the sky. It's bravery itself to live as a woman at all. And there's no such thing as a woman too bold. Thank you.
Thank you, man. That was lovely. You know, we don't ask our authors to talk to each other before they come to Story Hour and plan a program. And these 2 beautiful stories, although very different and unique from one another, still feel like they belong on the same program tonight. So really lovely work. Laura Blackwell and Karlo Yeager Rodríguez, thank you so much for sharing your work with us tonight.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Karlo.
Next week,
Thank you both.
come on back. We have Darla Lavelle, Catherine Lundoff. So between now and next Wednesday, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Good night, everybody.